He had not spoken to his son in 14 years. He had sent no letters, made no calls. He had sat in his large quiet house and told himself that he was right and that being right was enough. He was wrong about both. And then one morning his housekeeper made a phone call he did not ask her to make, and everything he had been carrying for 14 years finally had somewhere to go. Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. Before we get into today's story, please take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now, let us begin. Arthur Bennett had been a judge for 31 years. He had presided over cases that made headlines. He had sent men to prison who deserved to go. He had acquitted men who deserved to walk free. He had sat on the bench with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that the most powerful thing in a courtroom is not volume or eloquence, but the quality of attention you bring to the truth in front of you. He had been, by every account, a great judge. He had been, by his own private account, a poor father. Not in the obvious ways. He had provided everything. The house in the right neighborhood, the right schools, the holidays abroad, the careful measured encouragement that a man of his generation understood to be the appropriate expression of parental love. He had shown up at the events that required showing up. He had paid for the things that required paying for. He had attended every school play, every graduation, and every milestone that had a date attached to it and could be put in a diary and prepared for in advance. What he had not given his son Michael was the thing Michael had actually needed, which was simply to be known. Arthur was a private man. He had been raised by private people in a household where emotion was managed the way weather is managed, acknowledged when unavoidable, never invited, and dealt with as quickly and efficiently as possible so that life could return to its proper order. Feeling things was not discouraged exactly. It was simply not discussed. It was private. It stayed indoors. He had married a woman who understood this instinctively. Her name was Margaret. She was warm in the way that some people are warm without effort, as naturally as breathing, without performance or self-consciousness. She had created a warmth in their home over 38 years that had compensated, without either of them ever naming it, for what Arthur could not provide directly. She was the translator between them, the one who understood both languages and could move between them. She died 11 years ago. Cancer. Fast and thorough and entirely without mercy. She was given 4 months and she lived 3 of them fully, and then she was gone. After Margaret died, the compensation was gone. What remained was Arthur and Michael, 2 men who loved each other in a language neither of them had learned to speak, separated by 38 years of a warmth that had always been provided by someone else. Neither of them had ever needed to learn the language because the translation had always been available. And now it wasn't. They tried. For 3 years after Margaret died, they tried. Sunday dinners, occasional phone calls, the careful maintenance of a relationship that had always depended on a third person to hold it in shape. Without Margaret, it sagged. Without Margaret, the silences were different, longer, heavier, full of things that neither man knew how to say directly. They kept trying. Arthur because he understood that Michael was all he had left of the life he and Margaret had built. Michael because he was, at his core, a person who did not give up on things easily. They kept trying for 3 years with the particular persistence of 2 people who love each other and cannot find a way to show it that works for both of them. And then came the wedding. Michael was 42 when he married. He had been with his partner David for 7 years. Deemed 7 years of a relationship that Arthur had known about and had managed by the particular method of his generation, which was to not discuss it directly. He had met David 3 times before the wedding. He had been courteous. He had been controlled. He had said nothing unkind and nothing particularly warm and had maintained the precise neutrality of a man who has decided that silence is safer than speech. The wedding was small, 30 people, a registry office and then a dinner at a restaurant that Michael and David had chosen carefully. It was full of warmth and laughter and the particular joy of people celebrating something that matters to them. Arthur sat in the front row. He wore his good suit. He gave a toast that was correct and measured and said all the right things in the right order. And then at the dinner afterward, when the speeches were done and the wine had been flowing for 2 hours and the room was warm and loose and Arthur had drunk more than was his custom, he said something to Michael that he had not planned to say. He said it quietly, just the 2 of them, standing at the edge of the room near the window while everyone else was on the small dance floor. Michael had come to find him. Arthur had been standing alone for 20 minutes, and Michael had noticed and come over the way he always came over, with the particular attentiveness of a son who has spent his whole life paying attention to his father. And Arthur, standing there with a glass of wine in his hand, and the warmth of the room, and the particular unguardedness that comes from having drunk more than usual, and from being in a place full of emotion he did not know how to hold, said it. Why, he said he was not sure he understood it, the life Michael had chosen. He said he had tried for 7 years to understand and had found the trying difficult. He said the words carefully, the way a careful man says difficult things, as though care in the delivery might soften the impact of the content. He said he loved Michael. He said that clearly. He said it first, even before the other thing. But the other thing had already been said, and the saying of it could not be undone by what came before or after. Michael looked at his father for a long moment. In that moment, Arthur saw something happen in his son's face that he had never seen before. Not anger, not tears. Something quieter and more final than either of those. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular thing to be said and has spent years hoping it would not be said and has just had that hope removed. "I know, Dad," Michael said. "I've always known you didn't understand. I just didn't know you'd say it out loud on my wedding day." He looked at his father for one more moment. Then he turned and walked back to the dance floor. He took David's hand. He danced. He did not look at Arthur again that evening. He did not speak to Arthur again for 14 years. Arthur drove home alone that night. He sat in his car outside his house for a very long time. He told himself he had said nothing that was not true. He told himself that Michael knew how he felt and had always known, and that saying it honestly was not a crime. He told himself that Michael would come around. So that time would soften it, that sons and fathers had arguments and came through them. He told himself these things for 14 years, and they were wrong, all of them. But he went on telling himself because the alternative was to sit with what he had actually done, and sitting with it was more than he knew how to do. He was 79 years old now. He had been retired for 6 years. The house was large and quiet, and full of the accumulated objects of a long life. Margaret's books were still on the shelves, arranged the way she had arranged them, alphabetical within categories that made sense to her and not necessarily to anyone else. Her reading glasses were still on the bedside table on her side of the bed. He had never moved them. He could not have explained why if asked. Only that moving them felt like the kind of finality he was not ready for, even 11 years on. The house had 14 rooms and Arthur used 5 of them. The kitchen, the sitting room, the study, the bedroom, and the garden, which was not a room but which he had come to think of as one over the past few years, since he had started spending his mornings there with his tea in the chair that had been Margaret's chair. The rest of the rooms he kept clean and closed. He was not ready to make them into anything else. He was not ready to let them go. So they stayed as they were, sealed and waiting. The rooms of a life that was not finished but was running out of time. His housekeeper was a woman named Grace. She was 54 years old. She had worked for him for 20 years, arriving 3 times a week to clean and cook and manage the quiet logistics of the house. She was not a warm person in an obvious way. She did not chatter or perform cheerfulness. She was competent and observant and had developed, over 20 years, a precise understanding of what Arthur needed and when he needed it, and when he needed to be left alone. She had never spoken to him about Michael, not once in 20 years. Not when she had first understood the situation by reading the particular silences of the house. Not when she had found a birthday card for Michael that had been addressed but never sent, sitting on Arthur's desk in the study. Not when she had noticed, over the years, the way Arthur always had his phone in his hand on Sunday mornings and never made the call. She had kept her views to herself. Until the October morning when she arrived at the house and found Arthur sitting at the kitchen table in his coat with his hands flat on the surface, not moving, looking at the wall. The doctor had called the previous week. There had been a scan. The results were not catastrophic, but they were not good either. They were the kind of results that a man of 79 understands to mean that the runway is getting shorter, that the things not yet done will soon be permanently not done. Grace made tea. She sat down across from him. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Bennett, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Arthur looked at her. "How much longer are you going to do this?" she asked. He knew what she meant. He had always known what she meant, even when she had never said it. "Grace," he said, "that is not your business." "With respect, sir," she said, It has been my business for 20 years. I have watched you sit in this house for 14 years, waiting for something to change without doing anything to change it. I have watched you become quieter every year. I have watched the house get emptier and quieter around you, and I have said nothing because it was not my place to say something. She paused. She looked at him steadily. It is my place now, because the results from your doctor are on the kitchen counter and I can read and I know what they mean. And if you wait any longer, there will not be enough time left to do this properly. Arthur looked at the kitchen counter. He had not hidden the letter. He had simply not moved it. He felt, looking at it now, no particular surprise that Grace had read it. She had always paid attention to everything in the house. It was one of the reasons he valued her. I know, he said. Then call him, Grace said. I wouldn't know what to say, Arthur said. You would say you are sorry, Grace said. That is all. You have spent 14 years working out whether you are sorry. Are you? Arthur looked at his hands. The question was not complicated. It had never been complicated. What was complicated was saying the answer out loud to the person who needed to hear it. Yes, he said. Yes, I am sorry. Then that is what you say, Grace said. That is the whole conversation. Everything else follows from that. He thinks I don't love him, Arthur said. That I disapprove of who he is, of David, of all of it. Grace looked at him steadily. Do you? Arthur's jaw tightened. Then something in him that had been held tight for a very long time began, very slowly, to release. No, he said. I don't. I never did. I disapproved of my own inability to understand something I had not tried hard enough to understand. I was afraid of what I didn't know. I said what I said because I was afraid of it, and then I let it stand for 14 years because I was too proud to take it back. He paused. That is the truth. That is all of it. Grace nodded slowly. Then that is what you say to him, she said. Exactly that. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Grace stood up and began to wash the cups. Long enough that the kitchen sounds returned. The water running, the quiet clink of china, the particular domesticity of the morning continuing around him. He'll say no, Arthur said eventually. He has every right to say no. He might, Grace said, her back still turned. But you will have tried. And even if he says no, the trying matters. It matters for you even if it doesn't change anything for him. Arthur looked at the table. I wouldn't know how to find him, he said. After all this time. Grace turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She reached into her apron pocket and set a piece of paper on the table in front of him. A phone number, written in her neat, careful handwriting. I found him 6 months ago, she said. I have been waiting for the right time to give it to you. I think this is the right time. Arthur stared at the paper. He stared at it for a long time. You had no right to do that, he said finally. No, Grace said simply. I didn't. A pause. Thank you, Arthur said. Grace picked up the cups. She went back to the kitchen. She turned the radio on low, the way she always did. She gave Arthur the particular and very deliberate gift of turning her back so that he could sit with what he was feeling without having to manage how it looked to anyone else. He sat with it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. The phone rang 4 times. Arthur had prepared himself for voicemail. He had prepared a brief, careful message, 2 sentences, no more. Enough to say that he had called and why, and that he understood if Michael chose not to respond. Michael answered on the 4th ring. His voice was cautious. He did not recognize the number. Hello. Michael, Arthur said. It's your father. A silence. It was not a short silence. It was the kind of silence that contains 14 years of things unsaid. Arthur sat inside it without trying to fill it. He had spent 31 years understanding that silence in response to something important is not the absence of a response. It is a response, and it deserves to be heard. Dad, Michael said finally. His voice was not warm. It was not cold either. It was careful. The voice of a man who has built walls for 14 years and is standing at them now, deciding whether to open the gate. I know I have no right to call, Arthur said. I am not calling to explain what I said or to argue about it. I am calling because I am 79 years old and I am running out of time, and I do not want to run out of it without saying something that should have been said a very long time ago. Michael said nothing. I am sorry, Arthur said, for what I said at your wedding. Tiege, I have thought about it every single day for 14 years. Not because I was looking for a way to justify it, because I was trying to understand it. I wanted to know why I said it, what it meant about me that I said it. And what I have understood, after 14 years of thinking, is that I said it out of fear and out of ignorance and out of the particular failure of a man who had not grown past the edges of the world he was raised in. I said it, and then I let it stand. I let it stand for 14 years. And that is the part I am most ashamed of. Not the thing I said on the night, the years after. He stopped. The line was still open. He could hear Michael breathing, slow and careful. Are you well? Michael asked. His voice was still guarded. But underneath the guard, there was something that had not yet decided what it was. No, Arthur said. I am not particularly well. That is part of why I am calling now rather than 6 months from now. But I want you to know that it is not the only reason. I am not calling simply because I am ill. I am calling because I have been wrong for a long time and I cannot afford to go on being wrong. A pause. I don't know what you want from me, Dad, Michael said. His voice was careful and honest and entirely without performance. I want to see you, Arthur said, if you are willing. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am not asking for anything to be the way it was. I am asking to sit in the same room with my son, to look at him, to say what I should have said 14 years ago and 10 years ago and every year in between. If you say no, I will not call again. I have no right to ask more than once, but I am asking once. The silence was different this time. Shorter. Something was being considered, and it was being considered carefully. I'll call you back, Michael said. Of course, Arthur said. The line went quiet. Arthur set the phone on the table. He looked at the window, at the garden beyond it, at Margaret's chair. Grace appeared in the doorway with 2 fresh cups of tea. She set one in front of him and took her own cup and sat in the chair across from him. Neither of them said anything. They drank their tea in the particular companionable quiet of 2 people who have said everything that needs to be said and are now simply waiting together for whatever comes next. Michael called back 3 days later. Arthur was in the study when the phone rang. He saw the number. He made himself wait until the 3rd ring. He breathed. He answered. Dad, Michael said. Michael, Arthur said. I've spoken to David, Michael said. He thinks I should go. He has thought I should go for years. I stopped him from calling you many times over the years. He never pushed. He just kept quietly thinking it and occasionally saying it and letting me make my own decision. Arthur listened. He said something recently that I have been thinking about, Michael continued. He said that whatever happened between us, you were still his father-in-law, and that he had never met his father-in-law, and that he found that sad. A pause. David is a better person than both of us, Michael said. He sounds like it, Arthur said. He is, Michael said. He is extraordinary. He always has been. There was a warmth in Michael's voice when he spoke about David that Arthur heard clearly. The warmth of someone speaking about the person who knows them most completely. I'm not coming to forgive you, Michael said. I want to be honest about that from the beginning. I don't know what I'm coming to do. I don't know what I feel yet. I just know that I have spent 14 years being angry and that the anger has cost me things. It has taken up space in my life that I would like to have back. I understand, Arthur said. I am doing this for myself as much as for you, Michael said. I want you to know that. I know, Arthur said, and that is entirely right. You should. Saturday, Michael said, if that works for you. This weekend is perfect, Arthur said. Come whenever you're ready. The house is exactly as you remember it. Grace still keeps it. A pause. Is Mum's garden still there? Michael asked. Yes, Arthur said. Grace tends it. It's beautiful. It is exactly the way she kept it. Another pause. Smaller this time. Okay, Michael said. Saturday, Arthur said. He hung up. He set the phone on the desk. He looked at the window. Then he put his face in his hands and wept, quietly and briefly, for the 14 years and for Margaret, who would have done this properly from the beginning, and for the old version of himself who had not known how. Then he straightened up. He dried his face. He went to find Grace and tell her that Michael was coming on Saturday and that he would need the guest room aired and something decent for lunch, and that the yellow roses from Margaret's garden should be in the kitchen on the table. Grace said she had already planned for all of those things. Arthur was not surprised. Saturday arrived. Arthur woke at 6. He dressed carefully. He went downstairs. Grace was already in the kitchen, which he had not asked for but was grateful for. She had made breakfast and put fresh flowers on the table, yellow ones from the garden, and the house smelled of something cooking that was warm and undemanding. He ate. He read the newspaper without taking in a single word. He watched the clock. At 11, a car pulled up outside. Arthur was at the window. He stood back slightly, not wanting to be seen immediately, giving himself a moment to simply look. Michael was 56 years old. He was tall. His hair was almost entirely grey. He was wearing a dark coat and he stood outside the car for a moment, looking at the house with the expression of a man who has come a long way in more than one sense and is taking a moment to acknowledge it. He looked up. He saw Arthur at the window. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Michael walked toward the front door. Arthur moved to meet him. He opened the door before Michael reached it. They stood in the doorway, facing each other. Two men, father and son. The last time they had stood in the same room, one of them had said something that broke the bridge between them. 14 years of weather had passed over the break. They looked at each other. "Come in," Arthur said. "Please come in." Michael came in. He stood in the hallway and looked around, at the coats on the hooks, at the particular smell of a house that has been lived in by the same person for a very long time, at the photograph of Margaret on the hall table, the same one that had been there since before Michael was old enough to remember. He looked at the photograph for a long time. "I miss her," he said. "Every day," Arthur said. That was the first honest thing they had said to each other in 14 years. It landed in the hallway between them like something solid, something to stand on. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Michael," she said. The warmth in her voice was entirely genuine and completely uncomplicated, the warmth of someone who has been waiting patiently for a long time and is simply glad the waiting is over. "Grace," Michael said. "You look exactly the same." She made a sound that managed to convey both appreciation and skepticism in equal measure. Then she disappeared back into the kitchen. Arthur and Michael went into the sitting room. The same chairs, the same light coming through the same windows, different people sitting in it. The same people actually, but changed by the years in the way that everyone is changed by years, and changed by the particular years these ones had been. They sat across from each other. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who have agreed to be in the same room and have not yet found the shape of the conversation. The silence of a beginning. Arthur spoke first. "I've thought about what I said to you every day for 14 years, he said. "Not to justify it, to understand it. I wanted to understand why I said it and what it meant about me that I could say it on that particular day in that particular way." Michael was looking at him steadily. "And what did you understand?" he asked. "That I said it because I was afraid," Arthur said. "Not of you, not of David. Of what I didn't know. Of the unfamiliarity of something I had not been raised to encounter and had not worked hard enough to encounter on my own. I was a man who had spent his whole life inside a very precise world with very precise ideas about what was normal and what was not, and I had not done the work of expanding that world. I had simply waited and hoped that it would not be required of me." He paused. "It was required of me, and I was not ready. And instead of admitting that I was not ready, I said something that put the failure outside myself. I made it about you instead of about my own limitations. And that was wrong." Michael was quiet for a moment. "You've had 14 years to work that out," he said. "Yes," Arthur said. "And I have spent them working it out in private and doing nothing useful with the conclusions. That is the part that shames me most. I understood fairly quickly that what I had said was wrong, within months, within the first year certainly, and I did nothing. I let the distance stand because I was too proud to be the one who crossed it first and too ashamed to face you until I had worked out what to say." Michael looked at the window, at Margaret's garden beyond it. "I did the same thing," he said quietly. "From the other side, I kept thinking that you would call, that you would be the one who came, that I shouldn't have to be the one who moved after what you said on my wedding day. And I kept that thought for 14 years, even as I could feel what it was costing me." He looked back at Arthur. "David wanted to call you, many times. I always stopped him." Arthur nodded. He was right to want to, he said. I know, Michael said. I know that now. A pause. Arthur. His voice changed slightly. Not softer exactly, more direct. I need to ask you something. Ask, Arthur said. Did you ever actually accept it? Me and David. Not just tolerate it. Actually accept it. Arthur looked at his son. The question deserved a proper answer. Not a comfortable one. A proper one. I have accepted it, he said. I want to be careful about the word because I am aware that acceptance is not something you reach once and then have forever. It is something you work at. But yes, over these 14 years, with a great deal of time to think and nothing to distract me from thinking, I have arrived at a place where what I feel when I think about you and David is not confusion or discomfort. But it is the particular sadness of someone who spent too long being confused and uncomfortable when he should have been paying attention to what was actually in front of him. He paused. What is actually in front of me is a son who found a person who loves him well and who he loves well in return, and who has built a life that is real and full and good. That is not something I have any business being anything other than grateful for. Michael looked at his father for a long time. The expression on his face was not forgiveness, not yet. It was something more careful than that. The expression of someone who has been given something that they are going to hold carefully and examine before they decide what to do with it. Okay, he said finally. Just that. Okay. But the word carried more weight than its size suggested. When Grace brought lunch at 1 o'clock, soup and bread and cold water in a jug, set on the table in the sitting room with the particular unobtrusiveness of someone who knows that what happens in a room is more important than what is served in it. She disappeared without a word. They ate. They talked. Not about the 14 years. Not yet. There would be time for the careful archaeology of those years. Today was not the day for that. Today was the day to begin to remember that they were people to each other and not just positions in an argument. Michael talked about his work. He was a professor of literature at a university. He taught 19th century novels to students who were often surprised to find they loved them. He talked about a student he had last year who had come to his office hours to say that a novel they had studied together had, in his words, changed the way he understood his own life. He talked about it with a quiet pride that Arthur recognized because it was the same pride he had felt in the courtroom when a jury delivered a verdict that was just and right, the pride of a person doing the thing they were meant to do. Arthur listened. He asked questions. He did not offer opinions. He simply received what Michael was telling him with the full attention of a man who has been given the gift of his son talking freely and is not going to waste a single word of it. Michael talked about the university, about his colleagues, was about the particular pleasure of a long summer in which he and David had walked the length of a coastal path over 2 weeks, staying in small guest houses, carrying everything they needed on their backs. He talked about David's cooking, which was extraordinary. He talked about the house they had bought 3 years ago, a Victorian terrace that had needed a great deal of work and which they had done themselves over 18 months of weekends. He talked about David the way Arthur had always talked about Margaret, with the ease and the warmth of someone describing the person who makes sense of the rest of their life. Arthur heard it clearly. He heard what he had missed for 14 years. He heard the fullness of his son's life, and he sat inside the hearing of it and did not say a word except to ask another question. At some point, Michael said, quietly and in passing, that he and David had been trying to adopt for 2 years, that the process was long and uncertain, that they had been told to be patient, and they were trying to be patient, and that patience in this context was the hardest thing either of them had ever been asked to do. Arthur set down his spoon. I didn't know that, he said. No, Michael said. You wouldn't. A pause. I hope it works, Arthur said. I hope very much that it works. Michael looked at his father. So do I, he said. More than anything. After lunch, they went into the garden. The October light was low and golden, and the roses were past their best, but still present, still the dark red that Margaret had always chosen, still exactly where she had planted them 20 years ago and tended every season since. What Michael stood among them for a while. He crouched and looked at one of them closely. He touched the petals. She loved this garden, he said. Every part of it, Arthur said. She knew every plant by name, not just the common name, the proper Latin name. She found it important that things were called what they were actually called. Michael almost smiled. That sounds like her. They stood among the roses for a while. The October light moved across the garden. A bird called somewhere in the hedge. The city was very far away. You never came out here, Michael said. Not once when we were growing up. She would be out here for hours and you would be in the study. I know, Arthur said. Why? Arthur thought about the honest answer. Not the comfortable one, the honest one. Because I didn't know what this was for, he said. I understood the study. Why not? I understood the courtroom. I understood structures and arguments and things that had purposes I could articulate. I didn't understand a garden. I didn't understand sitting with something that grew slowly and didn't do anything you asked it to do and couldn't be made to hurry or improve by force of will. He looked at the roses. I understand it now, he said. I come out here every morning. I sit in her chair. I look at what she built, and I think about all the things I should have been paying attention to when I wasn't paying attention to them. Michael was quiet. Then he walked to the old chair. He sat down in it. The way you sit down in a chair that is not yours but that you have a connection to, that goes beyond ownership. Arthur stood beside him. They were quiet for a while. Just the two of them in the garden in the October afternoon. Just a father and a son who had spent 14 years on opposite sides of a distance that neither of them had wanted and both of them had maintained. I'm not going to pretend this is simple, Michael said. It isn't. I'm glad I came. I am genuinely glad I came. But I am not going to pretend that one afternoon in a garden undoes 14 years. I'm not asking you to pretend that, Arthur said. I know, Michael said. That's part of why I'm still here. Because you're not asking me to pretend. He looked up at his father. David wants to meet you, he said. He has always wanted to meet you. Even after everything. He told me once that you were still his father-in-law. And that he had never properly met his father-in-law. And that this seemed to him like an unreasonable state of affairs. Arthur felt something that was warm and painful at the same time move through him. I would like to meet him, he said. Properly. Very much. Then come for Christmas, Michael said. Come to our house. David will cook. He is extraordinary. You will come for Christmas and you will meet David properly and we will see what happens from there. Arthur looked at his son. Yes, he said. I will come for Christmas. I'm going to hold you to that, Michael said. You should, Arthur said. Before Michael left, he stood in the hallway again and looked at the photograph of Margaret. He stood there for a long time, long enough that Arthur came and stood beside him, and they both looked at her together. The photograph was from the early years of their marriage. Margaret was laughing at something off camera. She always seemed to be laughing at something off camera in photographs. She would be glad, Michael said, that we did this. Yes, Arthur said. She would first be furious that it took this long, and then she would be glad. Michael made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something more complicated. He turned and hugged his father. It was the first time in 14 years. Arthur held his son and felt the full weight of what 14 years costs. The specific physical weight of it. The understanding that cost this high cannot be undone by one afternoon, but that one afternoon is where the undoing begins. Call me, Michael said, pulling back. Don't wait for me to call. You call. Every Sunday, Arthur said. 7:15 in the morning. Michael shook his head slowly. But something in his expression had changed from what it had been when he arrived. Something had moved. Goodbye, Dad, he said. Goodbye, son, Arthur said. He watched Michael walk down the path. Get in the car. Drive away. He stood in the doorway until the car turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Then he closed the door. He went to the kitchen. Grace was there. He sat down. She set a cup of tea in front of him without being asked and sat across from him with her own. They sat in the quiet for a while. After a while, Arthur said, Grace, thank you for all of it, for 20 years of paying attention and for the phone number and for the flowers on the table and for turning your back so that I could sit with things. Grace looked at him over her cup. It was what needed doing. She said simply. Arthur looked at the table. Yes, he said. It was. He called every Sunday after that. 7:15 in the morning, without fail. He called on rainy Sundays and clear Sundays. He called on the Sunday of his 80th birthday and on the Sunday after Christmas and on ordinary Sundays with nothing particular to mark them. He called and sometimes Michael answered immediately and sometimes it took a few rings and twice in the early months it went to voicemail and Arthur left a brief message that said simply, It's your father. Calling as promised. Speak to you next week. Both times Michael called back within the hour. The calls were not always long. sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. They talked about ordinary things, books and weather, Margaret's garden and how the roses were doing, David's cooking and what he had been attempting this week, Arthur's health and how it was progressing, Michael's department and the students who were giving him reason to hope. They talked the way people talk when they are getting to know each other for the first time, even though they have known each other for 56 years, because in some ways that is what they were doing, getting to know each other for the first time without Margaret translating, the first time in the actual language of who they each were. It was not always easy. There were Sundays when the conversation was stiff and careful, Sundays when they both felt the weight of the 14 years between them and neither of them knew what to do with the weight. Sundays when Arthur said something that landed wrong and they both noticed and had to navigate around it carefully. But they kept calling and they kept answering. Christmas came. Arthur drove to Michael and David's house on Christmas morning. He wore his good suit. He brought wine and flowers and a small painting he had found in the market that he thought, without being entirely sure why, that David would like. David opened the door. He was tall. He had a warm, open face and the particular ease of someone who has decided to be generous about something and means it completely. He looked at Arthur for a moment, with an expression that was not hostile and was not performatively warm either. It was the look of someone who has thought carefully about this moment and has arrived at it with both clarity and kindness. Arthur, he said, I am very glad you came. Thank you for having me, Arthur said. And thank you for always wanting me here, even when I gave you no reason to. Maid David looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped back. Come in, he said. Michael is in the kitchen, making a case for his potato roasting method that has no basis in culinary history. He could use some company. Arthur stepped inside. The house was warm and full of the particular noise of a house being lived in properly. Music from somewhere. The smell of something wonderful cooking. Christmas decorations that were plentiful and slightly chaotic in the way that suggests the people who put them up were enjoying themselves more than they were following a plan. Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at his father. Dad, he said. You came. I said I would, Arthur said. Michael nodded. He stepped aside. Arthur walked into the kitchen. They cooked Christmas lunch together, all three of them. It was warm and chaotic, and occasionally argumentative in the pleasant way that kitchens are when people who are learning each other's habits are also trying to produce something together. Arthur peeled vegetables and was corrected and adjusted his method. He laid the table and was told the cutlery arrangement was non-standard and changed it. He opened the wine and was told it should breathe and set it aside on the counter. He did all of it with the particular gladness of a man who has been given something he had not expected to have and is determined not to waste a moment of it. At the table, with the food between them and the Christmas music playing quietly and the candles lit, David raised his glass. To Margaret, he said simply, who we all miss and who I wish I had known. To Margaret, Arthur and Michael said together. They ate. They talked for a long time, about the painting Arthur had brought, which David looked at with the expression of someone who is genuinely moved and then asked 3 precise questions about where it was from and what had drawn Arthur to it. About the coastal walk Michael and David had taken in the summer and the particular guest house where the owner had fed them breakfast for 2 hours and told them the history of every building they could see from the window. About the novel Arthur had been reading, which Michael had not read and which David had read twice and felt very strongly about. About ordinary things, the ordinary things of 3 people who are, carefully and with great care, beginning to be a family. At some point in the late afternoon, as the light outside went from gold to the particular blue-grey of a December evening, Arthur said, I want to say something. I would like to say it clearly so that there is no ambiguity about it. He looked at Michael. He looked at David. I am glad, he said, that you found each other, that you built this house and this life and this particular Christmas afternoon. I am glad in a way that I was not able to be 14 years ago. I am sorry that it took this long. And I am here now. For whatever that is worth. David looked at him steadily. It is worth a great deal, he said. More than you know. Michael was looking at the candles. Then he looked at his father. It means a great deal to me, he said. More than I expected it to mean. Arthur picked up his glass. To the future, he said. To the future, they said. About 4 months after Christmas, on a Wednesday afternoon in April, Arthur's phone rang. He was in the garden, sitting in Margaret's chair with his afternoon tea. The April light was pale and clean, and the roses were just beginning again, the first green hints of what would become the dark red blooms by summer. He looked at the screen. "Michael," he answered. "Dad," Michael said. His voice was different, lighter, the voice of someone carrying something good. "Michael," Arthur said. "The adoption came through," Michael said. Arthur set down his tea. He sat very still in the garden chair. "Tell me," he said. "Her name is Lily. She is 4 years old. She has been in care for 2 years, and she is extraordinary." She arrived on Tuesday morning and stood in the middle of the sitting room and looked at everything very carefully and very seriously for a long time. Then she sat down on the sofa and said, "This will do." Arthur laughed, a real laugh. She was full and unguarded and completely without the careful management that had characterized his emotional life for most of his adult years. "She sounds remarkable," he said. "She is," Michael said. "She is absolutely remarkable. She already has David completely under her authority, which took her approximately 45 minutes. She asked me last night if I had a father. I said yes. She asked if he was nice. I said he was working on it." Arthur sat with that for a moment. "Am I allowed to meet her?" he asked. "When you're all ready." "That is why I'm calling," Michael said. "She needs a grandfather, Dad, if you're willing." Arthur looked at the roses. "I am more than willing," he said. "Then come on Saturday," Michael said. "Come and meet your granddaughter." After the call ended, Arthur sat in the garden for a long time. He looked at Margaret's roses. Just beginning again. Every year they came back. Every year Grace tended them and kept them. And every year by summer they were exactly what they always were. Dark red, faithful, exactly what had been planted and what would always grow from what had been planted. He thought about 14 years, about what they had cost, about the particular cruelty of time that moves past while you are standing still waiting for courage to arrive. He thought about Grace at the kitchen table, the piece of paper with a phone number. Call him. That is the whole conversation. Just the truth. He thought about a 4-year-old girl named Lily, standing in the middle of a sitting room, looking at everything carefully and seriously and deciding that it would do. He picked up his tea. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Then he went inside to tell Grace that he was going to be a grandfather. She was already standing in the kitchen doorway. "I heard," she said. The window was open. Arthur shook his head. "You hear everything," he said. "Not everything," Grace said. "Just the important things." Arthur sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands flat on the surface. He felt the solidity of it, the realness of it, the particular and unremarkable sensation of being in a kitchen with another person at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday in April and having just heard the best possible news. He felt, for the first time in a very long time, like a man who had arrived somewhere. Not at the end. There was more ahead, more Sundays, more difficult conversations and careful navigations and moments when the old distance tried to reassert itself and had to be crossed deliberately. There would be awkward moments with Lily, who would need to get to know him gradually and on her own terms. There would be Christmases that were not as smooth as this one had been. There would be the ordinary difficulty of a family that had been apart for a long time and was learning to be together again. But he was here, and Michael was here, and David was here. And the 4-year-old girl named Lily had stood in the middle of their sitting room and decided that the whole arrangement would do. That was enough. That was more than enough. Grace put the kettle on. Arthur looked out the window at the garden. The April light was pale and clean on the roses. Then, and for the first time in 14 years, the house did not feel empty. And that, friends, is the story of Arthur and Michael. A man who said the wrong thing and spent 14 years calling it honesty. A son who walked away and spent 14 years calling it dignity. A wife and mother named Margaret who had held them together without either of them knowing how much they depended on her doing so. And a woman named Grace who had spent 20 years paying attention and who, at exactly the right moment, set a piece of paper with a phone number on a kitchen table and said, "Call him. Just that. Just the truth." That is the whole conversation. Arthur was not a villain. He was a man from a particular time and a particular world who had said something harmful from a place of fear and ignorance rather than cruelty. That does not make it harmless, but it makes it human. He was a man who had not grown to the edges of what was required of him and who said so. in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. And then he spent 14 years not doing the one thing that would have helped. Michael was not without his own stubbornness. He waited. He held the distance. He told himself he was waiting for Arthur to come to him, and he was right to want that, and he was also, as David quietly and persistently told him, punishing himself as much as he was punishing his father. Two people, both wrong in their own way, both waiting for the other to move first, and a distance growing between them that neither of them actually wanted, and then Grace, who saw everything and said nothing for 20 years, and then said the one thing at the one moment when it needed to be said. Sometimes the most important person in a story is not the hero or the one who was wronged. Sometimes it is the person who has been paying attention quietly in the background, and who knows, when the moment comes, exactly what needs to be done, and does it without making a performance of it. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave us a comment. Is there someone in your life you have been meaning to call? A distance you have been maintaining that you know, if you are honest, has cost you more than it has protected you. Maybe today is the day. We read every single comment, and if you are new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story. We are here every week with stories that remind us what it means to be human. Wherever you are watching from tonight, thank you for being here. Take care of each other out there. We will see you in the next story.